Have you ever walked away from a room full of voices and felt smaller than when you entered? As if no matter how carefully you chose your words, they dissolved in the air, leaving you unheard, unseen, almost invisible. We live in a world where noise often masquerades as authority, where the loudest person seems to hold the ground, while those who carry their calm are mistaken for weak. And yet, deep inside, you know it's not true. Silence has always unsettled people. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of presence. It doesn't explain itself. It doesn't bend to be understood. It waits. It watches. It forces the other to sit with their own words, their own unease. The Stoics knew this well. They believed that strength doesn't need to announce itself. It simply is. Those who rely on noise reveal their dependence. Those who master stillness reveal their power. If you've ever been dismissed, mocked, or overlooked, this is not a weakness in you. It is a sign that your strength lies elsewhere, waiting to be claimed. Because silence, when carried the right way, is not surrender, it is command. Stay with me, and together we'll uncover how to outsmart anyone, not by speaking louder, but by learning when no words are needed. 1. The trap of argument. Have you ever noticed how quickly the urge rises in you to answer, to defend yourself, to prove beyond doubt that you are right? It feels almost unbearable to stay quiet, as though silence itself would hand victory to the other side. We have been conditioned to believe this since childhood, that truth must be guarded with raised voices and sharpened words, that to leave an accusation unanswered is weakness. Yet the Stoics warned us that this reflex is not strength at all. It is fear. Seneca once said, "He who is brave is free." And the one who cannot remain silent is not free. He is still enslaved to the fear of appearing small. Behind this compulsion lies the ego, fragile and restless. It trembles at the thought of being questioned, confuses disagreement with attack, and turns every exchange into a battlefield. Think about the last time you argued with someone not to discover truth, but simply to prove you were not wrong. Did it make you stronger, or did it drain you, leaving you unsettled even after the words were spoken? The Stoics would say that most people do not seek clarity in argument, they seek power. They repeat their beliefs not because they are solid, but because they fear that if they are shaken, everything inside them might collapse. Argument in this sense is not wisdom. It is armor, hastily assembled to protect an insecure self, and this armor reveals its own weakness. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "If anyone can refute me, show me I am mistaken, I shall gladly change, for I seek the truth, by which no one was ever truly harmed." Notice how different this is from the need to win. The emperor did not cling to his ego. He allowed silence to be a strength, a pause that left space for reason rather than noise. When you feel compelled to justify yourself, you have already stepped into the other's game. The very need to defend proves you are still chained to the desire to be accepted, to be validated, to be understood at all costs. And that desire, far from making you strong, leaves you vulnerable to anyone who knows how to pull its strings. The Stoics compared this to living under the morality of the herd, always trying to appear good, just, acceptable in the eyes of others. But chasing approval is the surest way to lose your power. True strength, they said, is not in convincing others. It is in no longer needing to. It is the ability to hold to your vision even when laughter surrounds you, when criticism rains down, when rejection is the only response you receive. Imagine standing in front of a crowd that mocks you for refusing to argue. Do you break Or do you remain calm, knowing that dignity is not granted by their applause, but by your composure? To remain misunderstood, yet unshaken, that is the kind of strength Epictetus spoke of when he said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." I remember a story of a philosopher who was accused of dishonesty in the marketplace. His friends urged him to defend himself, to argue with passion so that people would know he was innocent. But he only smiled and said nothing. Days later, the truth came out on its own. His silence had not weakened him, it had preserved his peace. Those who expected a defense were unsettled because they discovered that his calm carried more weight than their noise. He had not played their game, and so he could not lose it. The lesson is clear. The theater of argument belongs to those who cannot master themselves. The first to leap onto the stage, to speak in anger or desperation, is already defeated. But the one who observes, who resists the pull to prove, who remains still while others are swept away, that one carries the true power. The reactive mind is enslaved. The observing mind is dangerous, for it is free from the need to be seen as right. So, if words can betray us, how then do we show strength? If silence is not weakness, how do we make others feel its weight without saying a single phrase? The Stoics had an answer. They pointed to the figure of the one who rises above the herd, who lives by his own measure, who dominates not by shouting, but by the discipline of absolute self-control. In the next part, we will explore this figure in detail and discover how silence itself can become a weapon of dominance, a presence that commands without a word. Are you ready? From here on, silence begins to speak. 2. The authority of silence. Have you ever wondered why some people seem to stand apart from the noise of the crowd, untouched by opinions, unbothered by the push and pull of approval? Most of us spend our days weighed down by expectations, rules imposed by society, the hunger for applause, the fear of rejection. We talk, we argue, we explain, all in the hope that others will see us as worthy. Yet the Stoics taught that this endless chase is the very chain that binds us. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to live. And to truly live, one must learn to break free from the prison of needing validation." There is another type of being, rare, disciplined, unshaken. He does not live by reacting to the world around him. He shapes the world by the power of his own composure. And the most striking thing is that he does this not with noise, but with silence. He does not scramble to win arguments. He does not waste his energy in emotional games. He watches, he studies, he decides carefully when to speak, and more importantly, when to remain silent. For he has discovered something most overlook. Silence itself is a language. It is not the absence of power. It is the purest form of it. Picture a heated gathering where voices rise and tempers flare. While others grow red with passion, one person sits still, his eyes calm, his expression steady. He speaks no words, but his presence unsettles the room more than the loudest voice. This is because silence, when rooted in self-mastery, becomes authority. It is not weakness, it is a command that requires no announcement. Seneca once reminded us, "He who is brave is free." And the bravery of silence lies in the refusal to be dragged into the chaos of others. This kind of silence is not passive, it is strength disciplined into stillness. Every word withheld is not a loss, it is a move unplayed, a defense unbroken. Every emotional reaction resisted is a weak point hidden from view. The one who practices this restraint is not empty. He has simply risen above the need to prove himself. His presence speaks in a way louder than explanations ever could. And what makes it so disturbing to others is not what he says, but what he refuses to give them. The satisfaction of control, of pulling him into their game. I recall a story of a magistrate in Rome who was accused unjustly in public. His accuser expected him to flare up, to defend himself with passion. But the magistrate stood still, listening quietly, offering only a steady gaze. His silence unsettled the crowd. The accuser grew frantic, saying more and more, until his own words exposed contradictions and lies. In the end, the magistrate spoke one short sentence, calm and unshaken, and the crowd saw the truth for themselves. His silence had carried more weight than an hour of defense could have. This is what Epictetus meant when he said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." The wise do not waste their peace in endless explanation. In a world addicted to noise, those who master silence become kings. The man who does not need to defend himself cannot be manipulated by guilt. The woman who does not crave applause cannot be trapped by fear. Their stillness is a shield, their silence a wall that others cannot breach. And when they finally do choose to speak, their words strike like iron because they are rare, deliberate, and born from clarity. Yet this raises a deeper question. Why does silence provoke so much unease in others? Why does the absence of reaction feel more threatening than 100 shouted arguments? What happens inside the human mind when the expected clash dissolves into calm? To understand this, we must step further, for the true power of silence does not lie only in the one who holds it, but in the storm it creates within those who face it. And that is what we will explore next, the chaos awakened in the minds of others when silence refuses to yield. 3. Silence as a mirror. Have you ever sat in silence with someone and felt the atmosphere shift, almost as if the air grew heavier? It is in those moments you realize that silence is never empty. Silence is a mirror, and what it reflects is often unbearable for those who cannot face themselves. When you choose not to react, you are not simply withholding words. You are compelling the other person to hear their own voice without interruption, to wrestle with their own arguments without the comfort of external resistance. And this unsettles them because most people do not speak to reveal truth. They speak to protect their image, to convince themselves of their worth, to mask the distance between what they say and who they really are. When your silence endures, that disguise begins to crumble. The Stoics understood this well. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "If anyone can refute me, show me I am mistaken in thought or deed, I shall gladly change. For I seek the truth by which no one was ever truly harmed." Notice what he does not say. He does not say, "Defend yourself at all costs." He points instead to the strength of one who can wait, who can listen, who can stand calm without fear of judgment. In the absence of your reaction, the other begins to feel exposed. Psychology confirms this. In confrontational settings, silence is often perceived as judgment. The speaker becomes restless, anxious, even defensive. The brain itself responds as if under threat, activating the same regions tied to fear and survival. The questions begin to spiral inside them. Is he judging me? Did she notice my insecurity? Does he see through my bluff? And all the while, you remain still. In that battlefield, silence becomes an invisible blade, cutting not the surface, but the hidden places no one else sees. Think of the way a manipulator thrives. They provoke because they feed on your reaction. They live off the energy you give them, twisting your words, drawing strength from your frustration. But when you remain silent, the cycle is broken. They lean forward, they push harder, but nothing comes back. And in that void, it is they who falter. I recall a story of a colleague who always tested boundaries in meetings, mocking, interrupting, speaking louder to dominate. One day, rather than argue, his target simply folded his hands and looked at him calmly without a word. The silence stretched. The mocker grew uneasy, his voice stumbled, and in that awkward pause, his weakness revealed itself more clearly than any counter-argument could have. Silence had disarmed him without a single word. Seneca once said, "He who is brave is free." Freedom in this sense is the courage to resist the impulse to justify yourself, to escape the trap of reacting in anger or fear. For the ordinary spirit, every provocation must be answered, every challenge met with noise. But the one who has disciplined himself knows that each unnecessary word is a concession, each emotional outburst a signal of where he may be struck. To withhold is not weakness, it is strategy. Silence does not expose you, it conceals you, while forcing the other to reveal themselves. Yet silence goes deeper than disarming manipulators. It reaches into the hidden wounds of the human heart. For those consumed by ego, silence awakens old pains, memories of being ignored, rejected, abandoned. Suddenly, they realize they are not at the center, that their voice is not enough to command presence, that their words do not bend the world. And for the ego, this is intolerable. That is why silence unsettles more than any sharp reply. You're not simply defending yourself, you're striking at the illusion itself, at the fragile need to be recognized at all costs. Of course, silence is not only uncomfortable for others, it is uncomfortable for you as well. To resist the urge to answer, to stay calm when every impulse tells you to react, this demands strength. It cuts against everything you were taught, against the desire to explain, to prove, to be understood. But this is why it is powerful, for silence is discipline, and discipline is mastery. Mastery over yourself, over your impulses, over the fear of being unseen. Epictetus taught, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And silence, consciously chosen, is one of the purest forms of that mastery. So the next time you are confronted, remember what is at stake. Your silence is not retreat. It is a stance. It is the refusal to let another control the rhythm of your being. It is the shield against manipulation and the sword that cuts through false appearances. When you hold it, you do not just unsettle the other, you affirm to yourself that you no longer need to be moved by every voice around you. That is the power the Stoics sought. To stand in calm when the world trembles. Now that you understand how silence shapes the mind of the other, how it stirs insecurity, dismantles defenses and unmasks pride, it is time to move from merely observing this truth to wielding it deliberately. In the next part, we will explore how to transform silence into a conscious weapon, how to win without words, and how to stand so firm in yourself that no one will ever be able to control you again. If you are still with me, let me know by commenting the word silent. And if you seek more strength in this journey, subscribe now so you do not walk it alone. 4. Weapons of silence. Have you ever noticed how knowing a truth is never enough until you learn to live it? The same is true with silence. To understand its power in theory is one thing, but to wield it with discipline is something else entirely. The Stoics warned us that philosophy without practice is like a sword that remains in its sheath. It may look sharp, but it never cuts. Now the time has come to transform silence from an abstract idea into a weapon you can carry, not only as a shield that protects, but as a blade that can strike with precision when the moment requires it. The first step is simple to describe, but brutal to execute. Remain silent when your whole being screams to respond. This is the most difficult moment, for everything in you will push toward defense. You will want to explain yourself, to justify your choices, to prove that you are right. But as Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, the best answer to anger is silence. Every time you give in to that inner urge to defend, you reveal that your peace still depends on another's opinion. You are still a prisoner of their judgment. True silence is born when you kill that need, when you realize you owe no explanation for being who you are, when you understand that truth exists whether spoken or not. The second strength of silence is observation. Most people listen only to prepare their reply, but the Stoic listens like a hunter in the forest, alert to every movement, every tremor in the voice, every contradiction hiding between the lines. Imagine someone boasting with arrogance, trying to dominate a conversation. While others rush to interrupt or correct, you remain quiet, noticing the small hesitations, the nervous flicker in their eyes. You store these observations patiently, and when you finally do choose to speak, your words carry the accuracy of an arrow released at the perfect moment. The third power of silence is time. Epictetus taught, if you are ever tempted to look for outside approval, realize that you have compromised your integrity. Silence extends the distance between their provocation and your reaction, and in that distance, you gain control. The pause itself creates tension, and tension is power. The longer you withhold your response, the more the other person collapses into their own unease. Their imagination begins to fill the void, fears, doubts, paranoia. A simple look from you, held in silence, can strike harder than 1,000 words. The fourth weapon is unpredictability. The one who masters silence becomes unreadable. And the unreadable is always feared, because people cannot predict your next move. They hesitate, they weigh their words, they lose the advantage. You shift the balance of power. You are no longer reacting to them, they are adjusting to you. In that shift, you become the gravitational center of the conversation, and silence ceases to be absence. It becomes dominance. But here lies a crucial warning. Do not confuse silence with passivity. Nature never called us to weakness. The silence of mastery is not empty. It is charged with intention. It is the calm of the warrior before he draws his sword, the composure of the judge before delivering a final verdict. You are not withholding because you are afraid. You are withholding because you are preparing, choosing, waiting for the exact moment when your presence alone has already spoken for you. And then, when you finally release a single sentence, it cuts deeper than any raised voice. Not because it was louder, but because it was true, undeniable, unshaken. There is, however, a darker side to silence, one the Stoics also recognized. Sometimes silence is not power, it is surrender. There are situations where people are not merely debating with you, but draining you, using your quiet compliance to build their advantage. In such cases, silence can become a silent scream of someone who has lost control of their own life, mistaking avoidance for strength. Epictetus warned, if you desire to be good, begin by believing that you are bad. He meant that true mastery requires honest self-examination. You must ask yourself, is my silence deliberate, or is it the mask of fear? Am I choosing not to speak, or am I simply unable to stand for myself? This is the danger. While you believe you are keeping peace, someone else may be constructing power upon your silence, and that is no longer strength, it is submission. Which is why the next step of our journey must go deeper. We must confront the possibility that our silence has been stolen, twisted into a tool of manipulation. We must learn to recognize when our calm has ceased to be strategy and has become captivity. In the next part, we will unmask this truth. We will expose how silence, if left unchecked, can betray you, and how to reclaim it before it is used against you. 5. The danger of submission. Have you ever felt the quiet sting of being silenced, not because someone forced you to stop speaking, but because life taught you that silence was your only option? Many are raised to believe that swallowing anger, conceding in arguments, and avoiding conflict at all costs is a mark of maturity. We repeat to ourselves that keeping silent means we are balanced, composed, above it all. But what if that silence is not wisdom at all? What if it is disguised submission? The Stoics would warn us that what we often call peace may actually be surrender, and the price of this false peace is far higher than we admit. Think for a moment about the times when others have taken advantage of your calmness. Because you listen patiently, they push their ideas harder. Because you overlook small offenses, they begin to make larger demands. Because you avoid confrontation, they expand into spaces that were yours. You convince yourself that it is not worth the trouble, that harmony matters more than your dignity, that one more concession won't change much. Yet, slowly, quietly, you feel something inside you shrinking. You are giving up ground piece by piece. And the worst part is that those around you already know you will not resist. Seneca once wrote, "A man is as unhappy as he has convinced himself he is." And here lies the truth. By convincing yourself that silence always equals virtue, you may be cooperating in your own diminishment. This is the morality of resignation, a pattern of thought that teaches you to shrink, to conform, to smile while you erase yourself. You avoid conflict, but you also avoid authenticity. You preserve appearances, but you sacrifice your inner strength. You even learn to feel virtuous about this surrender, as though being agreeable at the expense of your soul is a kind of goodness. The Stoics did not respect such illusions. They spoke not for those who chose chains, but for those willing to confront them and break them. I once heard of a man who allowed his colleagues to interrupt him at every meeting. At first, he told himself he was being patient, that it was wiser not to create unnecessary tension. But over time, they stopped even noticing his presence. His silence, meant as balance, had turned him invisible. Only when he began to hold his ground, to sit upright, to meet interruptions with calm but firm presence, did people realize he was not someone to be brushed aside. His silence was no longer a mask of submission. It became the silence of authority. This is the great difference the Stoics draw. There is a silence that weakens, and there is a silence that strengthens. One is born from fear, the fear of being disliked, the fear of losing harmony, the fear of rejection. The other is born from mastery, the recognition that you owe no one an explanation for your being, that truth needs no defense to exist, that dignity is not negotiated in arguments. Epictetus taught, "No man is free who is not master of himself." To remain silent because you are afraid is to remain enslaved. To remain silent because you have nothing to prove, that is freedom. When you accept the silence of submission, you surrender your power without realizing it. You allow yourself to be molded by the expectations of others. You become less yourself and more the image of what they need you to be. That is why it feels so empty, why resentment grows in your chest, even as you keep the peace. But when you choose the silence of presence, everything changes. This silence does not bow its head. It does not apologize for existing. It stands in the storm like an unshakable pillar, and without a word, it bends the course of events around it. This is the silence Marcus Aurelius described when he wrote, "Be like the cliff against which the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the water around it." The world does not need more submission disguised as peace. It does not need people who mistake passivity for wisdom. What it needs are men and women who can master themselves so completely that their silence carries weight, authority, presence. The kind of silence that commands attention not by force, but by dignity. The kind that unsettles the arrogant and gives courage to those still searching for their own strength. But how do we move from one silence to the other? How do we stop being manipulated and start becoming masters of our own presence? How do we kill the weakness within us that hides under the mask of being nice and instead cultivate a silence that cannot be bent? The Stoics pointed to the answer. It is found in becoming the kind of person who no longer needs approval, who governs himself so fully that his very presence carries its own authority. In the next and final part, we will explore what it means to embody this figure, not a dream of perfection, but a human being so disciplined in silence that he can rule himself, and by ruling himself, shape the world around him. 6. The silence of mastery. Have you ever mistaken silence for nothingness? Have you ever felt that staying quiet meant you disappeared, that your presence was erased in the noise of the world? If so, I want you to let go of that illusion once and for all. Silence is not absence. Silence is not emptiness. It is not just the pause between one sentence and another. True silence, the kind the Stoics spoke of, is presence in its purest form. It is the embodiment of mastery, the sign that you are no longer a slave to the world's constant provocations, but instead you have learned to shape the world simply by existing within it. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. That is the heart of silence." It is not surrender, it is the refusal to be dragged into the pettiness of those who need you to react. The Stoics never wrote for those content to merely survive. They did not write for the man or woman who drifts through life, repeating the same patterns, bowing to the same pressures, carrying the same fears. Their words were meant for those who dared to transcend, for those who are willing to tear off the masks that society has forced upon them, even if the act leaves scars. Seneca reminded us that it is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. What greater waste could there be than silencing yourself out of fear, guilt, or the desperate wish not to disturb the waters? The silence of the coward is not Stoic silence. The silence of the oppressed is not Stoic silence. The silence the Stoics honored is the silence of a warrior, one who has already won before the battle begins, because he does not need to prove his worth to anyone. Look at your own life with honesty. How many times have you remained quiet, not out of strength, but out of fear? How many times did you swallow your truth because you were afraid of rejection, of disappointing someone, of drawing unwanted attention? How often have you allowed others to decide for you, to speak in your place, to trample your boundaries while you convinced yourself you were being noble, patient, mature? Epictetus said, "Any person capable of angering you becomes your master." Now turn that teaching inward. If anyone can silence you through fear or guilt, they too have become your master. and every time you accept this type of silence, you betray yourself. I recall the story of a craftsman in Rome, skilled and respected, who one day was accused publicly of dishonesty by a wealthy rival. Instead of defending himself, he chose to stay silent, but not from courage. His silence came from fear of losing patrons, from worry about offending those in power. He thought he had preserved his livelihood, but slowly his reputation crumbled. People began to believe the accusations because he never spoke truth into the open. His silence was not presence, it was erasure. In the end, he became a shadow in his own community. Contrast this with the Emperor Marcus Aurelius, who was slandered many times. His silence, however, was not from fear. He did not defend himself because he knew his life and his actions were his defense. His silence carried presence, and presence always speaks louder than rebuttals. One man's silence erased him, the other's silence crowned him with authority. This is why silence must be mastered. There is a silence that enslaves, and there is a silence that liberates. The silence that enslaves is the silence of avoidance, the one born from the hope that if you say nothing, life will not press too hard against you. It is the silence of the man who bows his head to keep the peace in his household, though it destroys his spirit. It is the silence of the woman who never names her truth, fearing it will drive others away, though it drives her farther from herself each day. This silence corrodes the soul. It makes you a puppet pulled by invisible strings, your life directed by the will of others. The silence that liberates is the silence of mastery. It is not the silence of the one who fears conflict, but of the one who does not fear himself. He does not shout because truth speaks without noise. He no longer rushes to justify because truth does not require defense. His silence radiates authority because it is chosen, not forced. When others test him, his calm unsettles them. When others accuse him, his stillness becomes the mirror in which their own insecurity is revealed. It bends the course of the room without a word. Epictetus reminded us, freedom is the right use of the will. Freedom is exactly what silence offers when it is rightly used. It is the freedom of no longer being tossed around by every opinion, every insult, every provocation. It is the freedom of living as your own master. And when you embody this freedom, silence ceases to feel like retreat. It becomes the mark of one who has transcended. It becomes the voice of your dignity. So I ask you again, how long will you continue surrendering your presence to fear? How many more times will you let others decide who you are because you could not bear the discomfort of standing firm in silence? Enough. The Stoics would say that living this way is an offense to nature itself. To accept such silence is to betray not only yourself, but the very life you were given. To live enslaved to fear is to waste the gift of existence. The silence we seek at the end of this journey is the silence of presence, the silence of the warrior who has already won before the battle begins, the silence of the soul that no longer needs validation. It is not about conquering others with words, but conquering yourself with discipline. It is not about avoiding conflict, but about refusing to be enslaved by it. It is the silence of a man or woman who has looked within, confronted their own weakness, and found within it the seed of unshakable strength. And so we arrive at the truth. The world does not need more voices shouting to be heard. It does not need more talkers desperate for validation. What it needs is men and women who can master silence, who can stand in calm when chaos surrounds them, who can embody presence so deeply that their very being shapes the world without a sound. This is the final call of Stoic philosophy. to become the master of yourself, so that nothing outside of you can command you. If you can learn this, if you can shift from the silence of fear to the silence of mastery, you will no longer be at the mercy of others. You will carry within you a strength that requires no witness, a dignity that asks for no approval. And from that place, you will finally live as the Stoics intended, unshaken, unbroken, and free. That is the silence worth keeping. That is the silence that reigns. From this moment on, let silence no longer be a mask of fear, but a sign of strength. True silence is not retreat, it is presence. It is the quiet authority of someone who no longer needs to prove, defend, or beg for recognition. You owe no explanation for being who you are. Your calm, your discipline, your composure, these are your answers. Remember the Stoic truth. The weak react, the strong endure, and the wise choose when to speak. If these words resonate with you, write in the comments, "Silent power." Let it be your declaration, your reminder that dignity comes not from noise, but from mastery. And if you are ready to continue this path of strength, subscribe now to walk it further. The next step will take you deeper into the wisdom of presence, where silence is no longer emptiness, but the truest language of freedom.